Humankind is produced in association with WGBH Boston and supported by the Humankind Program Fund and a grant from the Henry Luce Foundation.
Our feeling wedded to the need to control outcomes, I think, is almost the opposite of what faith involves. To my way of thinking, faith involves a certain kind of surrender or a certain kind of letting go. The idea that the process is larger than we are, certainly larger than anything we can control. All we can do is kind of our part, our contribution, whether it be a kind act, a virtuous act, right speech. It's to, invest what we think is the best of ourselves in a process that's much bigger than ourselves.
The story of a man who took a leap of faith to do the moral thing and who was hailed for his heroism. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. Back in 1996, David Kaczynski, a sensitive and reflective social worker living in Albany, New York, faced an agonizing choice. At his wife's prompting, David had come to suspect something terrible. After analyzing the clues, he concluded it was probable that his estranged older brother Ted was the Unabomber, a domestic terrorist who had killed 3 people and injured 23 others. U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno, April 4th, 1996.
On Wednesday, agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and the Postal Inspection Service began executing a search warrant at the residence of Theodore John Kaczynski near Lincoln, Montana.
Ted Kaczynski, an unkempt hermit and Harvard-educated mathematician, was apprehended at his isolated one-room cabin. Agents found a live bomb in his bed and materials for building others. As chronicled in David Kaczynski's recent memoir, Every Last Tie, he felt an obligation to turn Ted in, to prevent the Unabomber from harming others. But David also knew that by tipping off the authorities, Ted would be subject to the death penalty, a punishment David opposed on principle. And he resented that federal officials had violated an agreement to keep his role as the informant confidential.
It was not, in any sense, helping me to be angry and to express anger toward the government. There was only one thing that could really help me, and that was to feel compassion for other people. The lives that my brother had taken, the people he had hurt, and their family members. And in truth, I believe that's really true, that when a person experiences a depth of grief or suffering at an emotional level, the best thing that they can do is to feel compassion for others. At least that was my experience.
It gets you out of yourself.
It gets you out of yourself, and you realize you have a place in a much, much larger world. And in fact, we are all interconnected, and now no one's life is all that much more important than anyone else's, even though we love them more.
David Kaczynski came to his beliefs in part through a heartfelt commitment to the peaceable practice of Buddhism. When we met for this interview, he was completing a stint at a Tibetan monastery in Woodstock, New York, where he served as executive director. About to enter retirement, David Kaczynski looked back on his at times painful odyssey.
Here I am, I'm suddenly the brother of a notorious serial killer. I'm also the guy who turned in his brother. Who's going to understand this? This is going to feel somewhere between repulsive and exotic and strange, and yet, for the most part, people I worked with, people I was friends with, kind of rushed to our sides, Not in every case. I think there were some people that just felt a little bit afraid about it all. The media was going in, talking to all of our friends and so forth. But by and large, it surprised me that there was more compassion and empathy out there in the world than I had anticipated. We ended up getting several hundred letters from people, and there were a few that were maybe strange people with some mental issues that they were connecting this story, but by and large, all of the letters were kind letters.
Isn't that encouraging?
Yes.
That in as extreme a circumstance as this, people's love can come out.
Right. I think of some of the other families who have been involved in the sense of in the news, having a loved one as the perpetrator of very high-profile crimes. Our family is in some ways fortunate because we were able to take steps. We were able to do something active to stop the violence, and in that way display that our values were not reflected by what our loved one had done. There are other families who, you never think it's going to happen in your family, whether you're on the victim's side or the offender's side. And so I really feel for some of these families that are just caught up in this. We've had some contact with some of the other families in other high-profile cases, and they're really, really hurting, and probably haven't gotten the kind of thank yous or compassion that our family has experienced because they never had the opportunity to show where their values were.
So what do you make of this weird paradox of you have this brother, very troubled, deranged, and you have embraced an opposite approach, an opposite philosophy, advocating nonviolence, advocating unconditional love for people, advocating a contemplative practice like meditation?
You don't have any easier questions you could ask me? I have sometimes thought that Ted and I guess the differences are apparent. You've just referenced them, but in some ways we're more alike than most brothers. I mean, we both took our ideas very seriously. We both lived in sort of out in the woods, and Ted lived in the woods in Montana in the mountains. I lived in the desert in Texas without running water, without electricity. We both had kind of experimented with, sort of going off into a wilderness with really different results. I think it would have astonished me had I known that Ted was, using his time in the forest to make bombs while I'm watching the stars in Texas. No, I'd be remiss if I didn't remind listeners that my brother has a very serious mental illness, schizophrenia, paranoid type. I don't understand exactly how all of this happens. I don't think it's necessarily just genetic. I think there are other things that happened in my brother's life that could have contributed. My mother often referenced that he had a hospitalization when he was an infant at 9 months of age, and that seemed to have traumatized him to some extent, that for a period of time after that hospitalization he stopped making eye contact or smiling. She'd thought even long before we knew he was the Unabomber that he had been affected by that childhood abandonment as she thought he experienced it. So there was that piece of it. My brother was also in a subject of a psychological research project when he was a student at Harvard University that was clearly an unethical and abusive study. The idea, it might even have been funded by the CIA, although there's no direct evidence of that. But in this study, Ted was subjected to emotional stress. He was demeaned, and so I think we have this reductionist tendency to think, what is the one cause? How does this bright young person end up killing people? I think it's more likely a perfect storm of a variety of circumstances that took Ted down, and it's quite a tragedy.
We're discussing the remarkable life story of David Kaczynski as as recounted in his recent memoir, Every Last Tie. David made the difficult choice to inform federal authorities that he suspected his estranged older brother Ted was the infamous Unabomber. And as we'll hear, David leads a deeply contemplative life. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. To learn more and to download audio or obtain copies of this segment, Doing the Right Thing, or of our previous documentary, The Unabomber's Brother, please visit humanmedia.org. In his memoir, David Kaczynski looks back on loving memories and painful outcomes.
Well, I had remarkable parents. They were working class people, hadn't graduated from high school until they went to night school as young adults. My mother got her college degree at the age of 50, but they loved the life of the mind. They had a deep reverence for nature and for the human spirit, and they did their best to convey that to us kids. They also gave us freedom to kind of find our own way in life. I'm very grateful to them. I'm also very grateful that my wife, Linda Patrick, is I met her when I was 11 years old. We were lab partners in chemistry in high school. Yeah, there was some chemistry going on, at least from my point of view. And as things advanced, and it was a little circuitous route, long courtship, but ultimately we became lifetime partners. And she brought me to Buddhism. She really had the insight and the bravery to really be the first person to identify the identity of the Unabomber, and led me through the steps that were needed, really, to do the right thing.
Although Ted Kaczynski had become increasingly extreme in his loner lifestyle and his anti-technology philosophy espoused in a rambling manifesto, David had always looked up to his older brother and remembered Ted's caring side. So the decision to turn him in to authorities ran against the grain of that affection. David was also concerned about their mother, Wanda, who he feared might be crushed. It turned out she had sympathy for David's struggle to do the right thing. He credits his wife, Linda.
Deeply compassionate person. So I think, often a focus is on an individual, what makes the individual what the individual is. Perhaps we should give more attention to relationships, because I think most people develop in the context of relationship. I think even if you're talking about ethical decisions, in this case it was really Linda and myself together who faced this dilemma and did what we felt we had to do, and then lived with the consequences as best we could and tried to make the best of those consequences. But again, it's in the context of relationship. It's not, the lone ego that's doing this or that. And I think that's part of Buddhist way of looking at the world, too. Our egos are sort of fabrications in some sense. We are our connections.
And quite a strong contrast to the hermit in a shack in Montana who was estranged from connection, from relationship.
That's a very good point. Yeah. I mean, I think we'll see almost as a symptom of mental illness that many people with mental illness will sort of isolate themselves and push even their loved ones away. And unfortunately, that's probably the worst thing that they can do, because living in isolation, we lose tools really to develop insight about ourselves. We fall into some kind of, the danger is that one loses one's grounding and one's identity becomes a sort of fabrication or fantasy.
David Kaczynski derives his grounding from a belief in Buddha nature, the philosophy that human beings are innately endowed with an essence that is characterized by compassion, by generosity of spirit. How much we tap into this essence becomes the fundamental course of our lives.
I think there are moments when we can clearly glimpse it in other people. just watching a mother care for her child, we're seeing some manifestation of Buddha nature. It's not a distant, abstract concept. It's available if we have eyes to see it. There are times in oneself when you can witness somebody doing something extremely kind or making a sacrifice for others' welfare or taking a risk for others' welfare, and just that welling of positive emotion of love for other people, I think, would be regarded as a manifestation of Buddha nature in oneself as well. I think for most of us, it's a fairly regular experience. The Buddhists prioritize it and say these kind of moments of compassion, of recognition of the beauty, the altruism in other people is a sign of something that's underlying, that's accessible, and more accessible the more we practice to try to cultivate it.
Seeking to avoid execution, Ted Kaczynski pleaded guilty in 1998 to federal charges of murder and of using and mailing bombs. He remains incarcerated in a supermax prison in Colorado without the possibility of parole. Occasional letters from his brother, who still cares, go unanswered. David Kaczynski has emerged as a fervent voice opposing the death penalty as a form of punishment that violates his spiritual beliefs.
Our parents had been raised Catholic, but by the time they had children, they had sort of embraced Enlightenment rationalism, and the only church they took us to was now and then to the Ethical Culture Society in downtown Chicago. And it was interesting that our parents invested morality or ethics in a sense of rationality. I remember when I was a child, my father trying to explain to me the meaning of enlightened self-interest. And it was the notion that if you mistreat others, ultimately, you'll create a world that will be less friendly for you, less comfortable for you. Very interesting, and almost a little bit, if you really think about it, like the Buddhist idea of karma, that, in some sense, the way you behave toward others is going to come back to you in one way or another.
What goes around comes around.
That's a good way to put it.
Do you regard yourself as a pacifist?
That's a good question. I remember when I was in school, the Vietnam War was on, and many of my classmates were protesting and conscientious objectors, and while I wasn't comfortable with the war, I told myself that it would be a duty to serve. If I were drafted, I would go. I think now that I'm older, perhaps wiser, seen more wars, feel more skeptical about the kind of processes that lead us to war. I feel much more closer to that pacifist position. My father was fond of saying that he was a pacifist. If you look back at the history of humanity, it's a tremendously violent history. And so it seems to me that the issue of violence is a primary issue. This is one that we have to closely watch and look at in human beings, particularly if we're talking about changing the circumstances in which we're living. If you use violence and power, the likelihood is that nothing will change or things will just get worse. But with love and compassion, I believe, the world can begin to change. People can begin to change.
It might take a bit longer.
It might take a bit longer. And that's in a sense where faith comes in. I think the basis of violence, the basic basis of aggression is essentially a lack of faith in other people and in the possibility that the structure of the universe, whether you call that God, whether you call it enlightenment, is, I think, the basis for me of spirituality and religion is this faith that the universe is structured in a way that supports the best in us.
David Kaczynski's unlikely journey has allowed him to view the problem of violence from various sides. On the one hand, he acted courageously to prevent his deranged brother Ted from committing further violence. David was later hailed as a true American hero by Ted's prosecutor. And he is an anti-death penalty activist, viewing a thirst for vengeance as only fueling the vicious cycle of brutality.
I think if you look at most violence, at its core is fear, and at its core is a sense of powerlessness, that the only way I can make an impact is in that moment of aggression, or that ability to inflict pain or to coerce in one sense or another.
Kind of a desperation.
I think, yeah, it's fear, it's weakness, it's desperation, and to me, this is the psychological, even the spiritual structure of violence. It is essentially made of fear, and I think you can never create strength out of fear. You can only create strength out of confidence and faith, and faith, I suppose, that pushes it beyond the immediately available evidence. If you need to control, you're not going to be able to control people with love, with compassion. You maybe control people with violence, with force. But if you're going beyond control, if you're really wanting to nurture someone, you're never going to be able to nurture, help, enlighten someone with violence in the way that you can with love and compassion, with providing a space for want of a better term, for their Buddha nature, that spark of God, to develop and, blossom or catch fire in them. And I think it's a mistake we make again and again and again, and we keep getting the same results. You take somebody who's done harm, and you say, well, we're going to kill you now, and that's going to make things better, and it doesn't. The death penalty, which was a great cause of mine for quite a while, and still is made out of a fear. What it takes to really change things for individuals or for a society is a greater faith in the power of love.
I wonder what you see as the spirituality of your advocacy against the death penalty. I'm struck by many people of religious, principled lives who take a stance against the death penalty.
Yeah, it's been very interesting to me to be an advocate, because I've seen numbers of people kind of in process. People who maybe never thought about the issue very much, or thought of it kind of simplistically. Well, if someone's taken a life, don't they deserve to have their life taken? Begin to see more complexities and start to think, well, what about the family of the person? Do they really deserve, this, to see their loved one executed? I've worked with members of law enforcement, and it's been very interesting to see the wheels begin to turn. I think there's, earlier I talked a little bit about Buddha nature, and I think if you get past that sort of spirit of vengeance, most people feel some uneasiness about using our justice system to take someone's life.
An eye for an eye.
An eye for an eye. But with all the fallibilities of the justice system as well, and the politics that swirl around it, and the fallibilities of institutions that make mistakes, and innocent people ending up on death row. And to me, as you kind of peel away those layers of belief, and you begin to see, well, hey, it's not executing this murderer is not going to stop the next murderer, that it's not going to bring anyone back. It's not actually going to heal the victims. It's more likely probably to re-victimize them through years and years of appeals. It gives them anything but closure.
In some ways, the life of David Kaczynski and his wife Linda Patrick were engulfed by what David calls the Unabomber's shadow. They discovered, he writes, that the only way out of our small hell was through compassion for those whom Ted had hurt and those whom he might yet hurt.
When one behaves virtuously, when one does the right thing, when one does a kind thing, you can't foresee all the consequences of that. You can't foresee how that's going to play out in detail. You can't say, oh, this bad person is going to be so touched by my act of kindness or forgiveness that they will change. So it's not about control. It's not about guaranteeing a particular version of the future. I think it is about planting seeds with the understanding that those seeds are going to blossom in some time, some way, some shape or form. I was very struck long before I had any traumatic, difficult circumstances to face in my own life by the Viktor Frankl book, Man's Search for Meaning. He was a psychiatrist who had survived a Nazi death camp and wrote about the nobility he saw in some of the people in that death camp. Acts of kindness, acts of generosity, acts of courage and bravery. And kind of drove home the point that we can only do these things with faith. We can only, if our stake is not in a given result, if our stake is purely a matter of faith that the good leads to good, the virtuous is going to be the most helpful course in the long run. I was very, very struck by that when I was a young person, and I felt maybe that little rush of Buddha nature. Wow, even people under these circumstances could have a kind of nobility. And of course, you know, even on an everyday level, we see pettiness in people, we see little acts of selfishness and so forth. But I think it's the human possibility of transcendence that for me represents the inspiration to try to live the best life I know how, and to be kind to people, even people who rub me the wrong way.
David Kaczynski, Buddhist practitioner and author of Every Last Tie, the story of the Unabomber and his family. You're listening to Humankind. I'm David Freudberg. Studio recording by Doug Sugarts. Editorial assistance from Ken Rogers, Kathy Graham, Mark Kilstein, and Bond Collard. Webmaster Brian K. Johnson. Special thanks to Tony Buck. Our program is presented by Human Media in association with Connie Goldman Productions. Program development provided by Shart Media.
To purchase a CD copy of this program, please call 1-800-5-LISTEN. That's 1-800-5-LISTEN. Or visit our website, where you can also obtain an audio download of this and our other programs and can hear selected episodes free. You can access free written materials related to this program as well. Our web address is humanmedia.org. Again, if you'd like to purchase a CD copy of Humankind by phone, please call 1-800-5-LISTEN, and our web address is humanmedia.org.
This segment, Doing the Right Thing with David Kaczynski, is Humankind Program number 238.
The executive producer is David Freudberg. This is Humankind.